Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second event in the Institute of Place Management and Regional Studies webinar series, Devolution, Where We Are Now and What's Next. Our collaboration with the Institute of Place Management will continue through to May next year, and we have two additional webinars scheduled on Monday, the 9th of February and Monday, the 11th of May. If you missed the first webinar in the series on privately owned public spaces, it is available to view on our website and on the Institute of Place Management's website. In a moment, I'll hand over to our chair for today's session, Ian Harvey, who is head of the Institute of Place Management and who will introduce today's topic and today's speakers. The RSA is very grateful to Ian and all of his colleagues at the IPM for their work in initiating and developing this collaboration. The IPM is a particularly valued partner of the RSA, and their work is internationally recognized for connecting research and practice to support a more vibrant and resilient and inclusive places. The RSA and IPM share an important and common aim to bring together academics, practitioners and policymakers to advance knowledge exchange and ultimately to help create better places for us all. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marcus Atkinson and I'm the Head of Partnerships and Engagement at the RSA. And for anyone who is new to the Regional Studies Association, a brief introduction. The Regional Studies Association is a global, interdisciplinary community of regional and urban researchers, policymakers, and practitioners. We have members in more than 80 countries and provide the professional infrastructure across a broad and multidisciplinary field of regional studies. We provide publishing, conferences, events, to grant funding for individuals and for research networks, to hosting webinars such as today's. It's a membership organization, as I mentioned, and publishes 6 journals and 2 book series, has open access online materials and newsletters, and also we provide a range of research and network grants. If you'd like to find out more, please do get in touch or visit our website. And before we begin, a few housekeeping points. Today's session is being recorded and it will be made available shortly on both the RSA and the IPM's websites. Please use the chat function to share comments during the presentation. There's also the Q&A function. Please use the Q&A function to submit questions. They're both to the lower part of your screen. In the chat, please feel free to say who you are, where you're from, and where you're joining from. The RSA's mission is to connect people, share knowledge, and support careers, and this webinar is an example of that effort. And so I am very pleased now to hand over to Ian. Ian.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you for the very kind words about the Institute of Place Management as well. When I sort of came into this role just over sort of 12 months or so ago, I asked all my academic colleagues who were the organisations, who were the key partners that we should be sort of doing more work with and doing more collaboration with, and all of them said the Regional Studies Association. So I'm delighted that we're now sort of the second session in of sort of this webinar series, which Marcus just touched on. But also I was delighted that a couple of weeks ago, a number of my colleagues, some of whom will join me on the call today, came along to the Regional Studies Association conference in London and delivered a workshop, which is basically sort of the precept to sort of the conversation that we're having today. So for those that don't know me, my name is Ian Harvey. I'm the head of the Institute of Place Management, and we are based at Manchester Metropolitan University. And it's great to see that the chat function is already going and people are already starting to say hello, mentioning where they are from. I probably can say I'm probably currently sitting in one of the wettest places in the country here in Liverpool. It has been pouring with rain since 9 o'clock this morning. But please do use the chat function please do say where you are from, whether you are a member of the IPM, whether you're a member of the RSA. And we're delighted that you are here with us today as part of this ongoing collaboration at what is quite a key sort of point and a key sort of time for devolution in the United Kingdom. The House of Lords will be debating the devolution bill, the English sort of devolution bill, next week, and it'll probably spend the next couple of months being discussed by House of Lords about what is effective devolution, what is effective place sort of governance. So this is something that IPM members and academic colleagues have been considering quite a lot in the Institute of Place Management over a number of years. So today is just a perfect opportunity to continue that conversation. So I'm delighted to be joined on the call over the next hour or so by my two colleagues, Nikos Ntounis and Professor Cathy Parker, by IPM member Chris Wade, and joining us from Greece, Ioannis Papageorgiou, who will be sort of talking about a Greek perspective as well. Please do use the chat function. Part of today is to hear sort of your perspectives on devolution. Part of today is for colleagues to sort of share their perspectives on where we are at. But any questions recorded, we will take back, and if we don't get the chance to answer them and discuss them all today, I can be sure that my colleagues will sort of be hearing what you are saying. So without further ado, I'm going to sort of ask my colleague, Dr. Nikos Ntounis, to sort of put on his slide. And as Nikos is sort of putting on his slide and opening up his screen, I'll just do a short introduction to Nikos. So Dr. Nikos Ntounis is a senior lecturer in the Department of Marketing, International Business and Tourism at Manchester Metropolitan University Business School, and is a researcher at the Institute of Place Management. His research focuses on the management of places and alternative approaches of place branding, placemaking, governance, and leadership within the urban environment, with a particular emphasis on squatted areas and privately owned public spaces. And it was one of Nikos's papers that we had the first sort of RSA webinar with. Nikos is also the managing editor of the Journal of Place Management and Development, which we might touch on a little bit later. So without further ado, I want to pass over to Nikos as he explores hyperlocal solutions to regional visions. Nikos.
Yes, thank you, Ian, and thank you, Marcus, for the introduction earlier. I'll try to be brief in setting the scene, and apologies in advance. I actually developed a slide called today, so my voice is a bit hoarse. So how we came up with the idea of like introducing hyper-local solution or hyper-locality in the context of devolution, that comes from our work, in the Institute of Place Management on town centers and high street over the past decade or so. So we've seen from this work that repeatedly that for places to thrive, they need to have that strong local leadership and institutions empowered to deploy the right interventions for places. And we're very happy to see that the government's English devolution bill is actually committed to working closely with these local leaders who know their areas best. And given the diversity of the town centers, to see how partnership working can actually support devolution. So the main point that we have there, obviously, is like, is this the most ambitious and coherent attempt to reverse England's what so-called entrenched centralism? And this idea of centralism has come repeatedly in the literature. The Regional Studies Journal, for example, has a lot of evidence on the actual topic of devolution and how this centralism and how meaningful devolution requires establishing a coherent and integrated multi-level governance system that fundamentally embeds the principle of subsidiarity. So how that is happening and how that aims to also support some regional rebalancing, it remains to be seen from the local perspective. And so recent discussion on hyper-localism, and you can see here the Restate paper on what actually is local and how we can establish hyper-local governance, addresses the advocates hyperlocalism as that solution to address that growing governance gap that takes decision making further away from communities. So in this report, for example, hyperlocalism, Kay and Goldward advocate for hyperlocalism to be universal across England, capable to achieve the organizational scale that is required and the capacity, and empowered so we can find the right organization that can actually contribute fully to devolution. And the literature on hyperlocal also suggests that this needs to hyperlocalism. Hyperlocal means that we focus on place, and means that we are referring to dense networks of governance actors that have a high degree of social cohesion to exert that sort of governance. But how that layer is communicated from the actual devolution bill remains to be seen. We have some examples from our work that we have done in the years to actually show how this can be done. So some lessons from the High Street Task Force and some background on the High Street Task Force, which informs part of our approach, part of how we approach devolution. The strategic context of the High Street Task Force, it was a 5-year project, a £9 million project, which the Institute of Place Management ran across 150 plus towns. And what we did over these 5 years is like going to all these towns and trying to understand the local governance structures that this place had. And what we saw there is, that there was a lot of uneven governance structures. Some of them were incomplete or very highly centralized and concentrated. And sometimes we saw that informal partnerships that we knew that can work well, we're actually delivering more than statutory bodies. And as further examples of how we approached this, how we saw this idea of hyperlocality working or not working. For example, an example of not working so well came from evidence from a government pilot program that ran throughout during the task force. And what we saw there is when those partnerships were forced from government, they were mostly fragmented and unrealistic. They had that idea of paternalistic governance that resulted in lack of participation with the same people involved in these structures. And overall, they had a failed narrative. Where we knew that partnership worked well, and we went to actually explore these partnerships, we found a stronger narrative based on organic development of these partnerships, rooted in hierarchic governance, meaning that there was a balance of formal and informal structures within these partnerships. There was a clear steer for place leaders and place leadership that had local understanding and strong skill sets to deliver place interventions. We also had a higher level of trust and a higher level of shared power and vision. And also there was some visible successes, but then with this success, there would come also the lack of support from local government sometimes that could inhibit this partnership's performance. And this happens, of course, because what influences place is multiples. It has multiple forms of agencies, and you can see here, for example, that we are talking about the strategic and systemic influence in places which it can be central government, legislative channels, regional governance that sort of shape the overarching vision and the governance structure and the long-term place-based strategies of the place. You have the operational and delivery level influence, again, relating to the central of day-to-day management. And then you have the tactical coordinating, this idea of bridging actors and conveners for specific place-based initiative, and also the tactical and relational influence, which is the deeply embedded actors within that have a high social participatory and relational capital. So these appear across multiple levels that kind of blurs again, what we're trying to do. So from our work from the task force, we find out that there are some enabling conditions for place transformation that can actually fit into the devolution debate, and they revolve in capacity and what is the role of place management in that one, which kind of remains limited at the moment. The role of partnerships and how we can actually have effective partnerships. Our evidence suggested, for example, that 40% of places that we worked had no partnership structures at all. Experience and identity, how we can actually be tactical and deliver quick wins and rebuild civic pride, and also leadership within that hyper-local governance framework, how we can actually find effective leaders and actually earn people's trust. And of course, we also identify some structural gaps in terms of the recognition, of the partnerships, as I mentioned before, how active partnerships were, but also how invisible they were in delivering these outcomes, and how some hyper-local actors were actually siloed from other talks of strategies that are a bit outside the hyper-local, and also how the lack of people skills and frameworks within local government can actually strain the operations of a place. So just to conclude very quickly, and to set the scene for the speakers, we focusing on clause 58, which talks about effective neighborhood governance. We find that very relevant, and we are actually welcoming it. We welcome this empowerment, but we do think that this clause is a bit vague, and a language shift may be needed in order to not only focus on neighborhood governance, but focus on effective place governance, and that will actually transfer responsibility much better. So we feel that local authorities must support the development and capacity of place governance structures through access to training, data, and peer learning mechanisms, which we are quite capable that organizations like the IPM, like the RSA, could deliver. And in terms of our position in that, we call for that plural professional ecosystem of place governance to actually build on what already works, to connect communities to wider devolution frameworks and enabling lasting locally determined change, and support this statutory guidance training and evaluation frameworks to make that close and overall devolution impactful. We have tested this in our frameworks during the task force, frameworks like the vital and viable priorities and the 4 hours of place change. And I'm sure there are other codes of conduct that can actually deliver that change. So I will just leave you with a final slide that kind of summarizes the position and what we're trying to achieve with this discussion at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Nikos, for sort of that rapid sort of run through of where we are at and some of the IPM sort of recommendations. Please do put your sort of questions for Nikos and other speakers into the Q&A function, and I will pick them up at the end of the session. Well, thank you, Nikos. Our next speaker is Professor Cathy Parker, who will take us into a deeper dive into one of the core challenges underlying devolution, the scarcity of granular place-based data. Cathy will outline the implications of this devolution data deficit and sort of what this means. Cathy, the floor is yours. Well, you're putting your slide up, so I'll just do your introduction. So Professor Cathy Parker, MBE, is a leading expert in place management, urban policy and retail geography. I'm sure she's known to many on the call today. With nearly 30 years of experience, she has played a major role in shaping town and city centre regeneration policy and practice. As a professor at Manchester Metropolitan University, she connects academic research with practical delivery, working collaboratively across public, private and civic sectors. In 2023, she received an MBE in recognition of her contribution to place and communities. Cathy, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ian. And thanks, Nikos, for setting the scene. I'm going to speak about something that we don't really talk about with devolution, and that's the data deficit. I think we're expecting, to be honest, miracles from devolution policy if we don't sort out the data infrastructure to support that. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And I'm talking about, unusually, probably a bid that we've put together for the Economic and Social Research Council that we don't know whether it's successful yet. We hope it will be funded naturally. These are the partners involved. I wanted to share the bid with you because it's a problem, regardless of whether or not we get the funding. I think it's a big problem, and I'm interested in your views on that. And sort of, I suppose it's a collective shared problem. If we don't get the funding, how are we going to tackle it? So, you know, I suppose I'm sort of like positioning this as a problem, and I'm hoping that we can engage sort of like more people into the solution, especially if we don't get the funding, because this work needs doing anyway. So they're the partners in the bid. We've got other academics from the University of Liverpool and Cardiff. We've got some commercial data providers. We've got MHCLG, and we've got sort of users of data. We've got the Royal Town Planning Institute, as well as the IPM network, and Lambert Smith Hampton, which are a large regeneration consultancy. So let me just sort of run through sort of what we think the problem is, and what we propose to do in the project or not in the project. I think we want to do this anyway, really. So the challenge, the data deficit. I think communities are being handed responsibility for generation, like the £5 billion pound Pride in Place policy. The prospectus for this was launched yesterday, but there's no data infrastructure to support them. So if we're going to hand over responsibility to local people to make their places better, how are they going to prioritize the issues? How are they going to design interventions or monitor and evaluate impact? And in the same way, as we've already heard about the Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill, that's putting in place new infrastructure for hyperlocal governance, or maybe not new infrastructure. It might be recognising existing infrastructure below the level of the local authority. So we think, you know, actual towns, actual neighbourhoods, district centres. But we know that there's not data available a lot of the time for actual places. So this is sort of problematic. We're handing over responsibility, you know, without the tools to really exercise that responsibility. So my worry is we're setting people up to fail. Devolution is sort of possibly the answer to a lot of things that we have in, you know, and problems in this country. And you can see that from the sort of political narrative using terms like take back control and so on. You know, the idea is that people will feel a lot more engaged if they're involved. But with that need, you know, we need some data to support that. So we know from the existing sort of you know, what we've got in data terms. We had a good look at this when we were running the High Street Task Force. Very fragmented data ecosystem, multiple data sets, all produced by different organisations using different definitions. They're updated on different cycles. There's no obligation to align that data. The geographies rarely match the geography of decision making. So, you know, we find a lot sort of like the local authority level that the local authority might be responsible for, say, 8 town centres. So we're trying to disaggregate and understand what's happening in each of those individual town centres. We know that there's a lack of capacity in local authorities, even for you know, data analysts to really understand this data, let alone when you think about the level, you know, new governance or levels below the local authority. It's probably a bit unfair that I've said opaque commercial data sets. Certainly not all of them, the commercial data, you know, they're a rich source of information. for a lot of place-based regeneration, you know, especially when you think about town centres and places that matter, you know, how busy are they, what are people spending. I think opaque's probably not, I probably would want to rephrase that. Not all of them. Some are quite opaque, so it's quite hard to understand what data is going in. But even when, you know, the commercial data providers are, you know, very upfront as to how they collect the data and what their sort of data sets contain, we still get back to that fragmented data ecosystem problem, which, you know, it's hard to sort of combine and align some of that data. And just like finally, you know, a lot of places just don't really have agreed sort of boundaries. So where exactly is the town centre? If we're talking about a vacancy rate of 20%, what is that? Is that in the entire town? Is it just the sort of very like core commercial heart? You know, it's really quite hard on a place by place basis. You have to sort of unpick all this. So it's, you know, it's difficult. And the picture isn't much better nationally. So when central government targets investment, and we know this sort of firsthand from our work supporting government, it uses the data it can get rather than the data it might need to really develop good policy. And there's a massive problem when it comes to evaluating the impact of policy, because the data just isn't there to do that type of evaluation. And there's sort of data quality issues because there's not enough local knowledge that comes into some of these data sets. So a point of interest data set might say that a department store that's been closed since 2020 is still open, and no one nationally looking at that data would necessarily know that. You know, that's why you've got to get local insight. So we've got policy at national level that's, you know, it's just not really reflecting the real issues in places. It's not always targeting the right places with interventions, and there's certainly no really strong way to evaluate the policy. So our project responds sort of directly to that, and the aim is to build an integrated secondary data infrastructure. Now, it's an infrastructure in that we don't envisage all data coming through this, but what we'll, you know, like to do in the same way we have done with other of our ESRC projects is build frameworks that allow data to come in and be sort of comparable, or understand the protocols by which you might do that. So it is ambitious, but because the data sort of already exists, you know, that cost is sort of there. You know, we know that there's data all over the place, really. So it's just finding ways to bring it together, harmonise it, and make it more useful. So that's the first research objective, really, is sort of identifying what's useful for place-based decision making, and then sort of like combining and harmonizing some sort of key sets of data, especially things that are publicly available, and sort of making that sort of usable. So we're going to be combining data from quite a few different sources, and where we've got commercial providers, the idea won't be that their data is available free of charge to everybody, but what we will be doing is using their data to understand sort of trends and how town centres are changing, to build some of those frameworks that then people can use with their own data or publicly accessible data. So we want to sort of use commercial data to test some of the classification systems that have been built in the past. Like we have our own work that we did with Cardiff and footfall data, which used one type of footfall data to develop town types. Are those town types robust when we look at other sources of data, other providers of footfall data, or even different sources like points of interest, for instance? So that's what we want to do in the first stage, is just sort of like bring things together in a bit of sense checking, and using the commercial data that we're able to get access to sort of understand sort of overall trends and build robust classifications. The second one objective is to move beyond sort of like description of data, like the first objective, this is what's going on, this is the sort of situation, to more explanation and use data in more of a modelling way. And there's where we're going to bring in some artificial intelligence to really try and get to the bottom of like what things influence, well, before we even get to the bottom of what influences success and decline, what is success and decline? Can we come up with some more sort of transparent ways of sort of saying what, you know, what the trajectory of a town or a place is on in a way that sort of everyday decision makers can sort of like get a handle on where their position is. So again, like all of our research, really, we don't want to build models and things that are, you know, you need to be an analyst, have a PhD in data science to understand. It's got to be straightforward. And if we're going to use AI, then AI's got to make the sort of relationships between variables visible. This can't be a sort of black box approach. We want to integrate local knowledge. You know, that's part of this project, is to build on the knowledge of partners and find ways to integrate, you know, what they know, their lived experience, and what they know about the places that they're working in. So that's our third objective. So we think this is an important project. It needs to run alongside sort of, you know, the impetus for devolution and lots of other sort of like current government priorities like Pride in Place. Without this project or something similar, you know, I just think we're, you know, that some of this effort's going to stall. Data has to be sort of spatially relevant. We've got to bring practitioners, we've got to bring to the people that are being empowered the data that they need to make sort of sensible decisions and see whether their interventions are working or not. The data has to be interoperable. You know, we have to be able to combine data sets, and that means more consistency and definition in units, in sort of spatial boundaries and so on. Data has to be trusted, and that's why I think we've got to find ways to bring local knowledge in so that people can, you know, make correct errors. I mean, if I've got to be absolutely at its most basic, there's significant errors in some data which local people are the best place to fix. So, you know, let's find a way to do that. And so that's why the idea of a project that sort of like builds some of this common language and definitions and frameworks for sort of like bringing things in, including that sort of local knowledge, we feel is a sort of missing part of the sort of devolution discussion at the moment. So thanks very much. Fingers crossed that we get the funding. If you want to connect up to me in LinkedIn, there's you could scan that QR code, especially if we don't get the funding and you've got some you know, some funding, some money or something you might want to put into this. At the moment, I'm not going around with the you know, the cloth cap, but anyway, interested in your thoughts as to whether you sort of like share this concern in that we don't have the data infrastructure to support devolution.
Thank you, Cathy. I was about to say, I'm sure Cathy would welcome being connected with on LinkedIn to discuss this. And then you beat me to it with your QR code, Cathy, much more advanced than I am. But yeah, thank you, Cathy. We now turn to Chris Wade. So Chris Wade is an IPM member and has 3 decades of experience of place management at the local, sub-regional and national level in local authority, third sector and consultancy roles. Chris is the author of the English Local Government Association's Revitalising Town Centres Toolkit, and was also an expert for the High Street Task Force. He has a Master's in Community Enterprise and Urban Environmental Management, and is partway through further Master's level research looking at the relationship between place management and branding. But Chris is with us today as he will be introducing his new Viewpoint article for the Journal of Place Management and Development on options for accommodating place management within devolved place-based governance and delivery. Thank you, Chris. If you want to share your slides.
Sure. Let me just get back to the beginning somehow.
Can you just speak up, Chris? I struggled to hear you then, so I don't know if it was just me.
Can you hear me okay?
You're a bit low. Maybe just
okay,
switch
let
them up.
me go into volume. I'm trying to get my slides back to the beginning as well, because I'm... Oh, here we go.
You sound a bit better now.
Can you hear me now or not?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
That's great. Okay. Local governance, where, what, and how. I'm going to try and begin to answer this question. How might decisions that affect local people and places best be made following devolution and local government reorganisation? And I'm going to draw on place management, but not doggedly. I'm going to try and take a pluralistic approach and look at what are the other models out there, and how do we need to work, particularly with different layers of government. And as Ian said, I'm drawing on a paper that I co-authored with Graham Galpin, who's in the audience today. And for two long in the tooth place management practitioners, it's a first for us to have something published in a journal. So kind of you're never too old. And I've enjoyed working with Graham in putting this together, not only because he makes me look like a young gun, but we're bringing different levels of experience from different areas, but we're managing not only to meet in the middle, I think, but to update and evolve our own thinking. So I'm going to share some of that, and then I'll share the paper towards the end. Just very quickly, this is some of my own analysis, but saying there's a lot going on. And I commented on a post this morning to say the proposals are in for local government. Now we can focus on the delivery. But actually, some of the controversy around boundaries rumbles on. But that doesn't distract us from the need to consider the timing, the changing responsibilities and funding, and the opportunities to influence policy, and my focus on governance at the strategic, the combined, and the local levels as all those things happening. I want now, though, to look at perspectives on local governance, and particularly from a government point of view, as if you like, the commissioners, the buyers of some of this, some of these models. And central government, there's very strong rhetoric we've heard, but they also seem to be, there's a certain ambiguity, ambivalence about what they're looking from local governance. Strategic authorities are going to have a key role at the sub-regional level of applying policies and priorities within their defined areas of competence. But not surprisingly, I think the key area, the key partners to look at are the reorganized and some existing unitary authorities. And it's to understand what's in it for them, what's their ethos, what do they see the benefits to the councils, and how much they buy in to benefits attainable to empowered communities from improved delivery. Place management. We need to explain that it's more about stewardship and promotion of places. What does place management mean to you, and how are its principles important in devolution? This is a broad definition from the IPM, but I think we need to drill down in the detail, and particularly if we're going to reassure people that it focuses not only on places, but the people within places. And that involves looking at the plethora of activities, place-based activities that it involves, the way it works with stakeholders, both at a local level and strategic partners, the spectrum of participatory approaches and how they can be mainstreamed. And as I say, its key role in addressing social as well as economic issues. And the challenge really that it not only improves people's experiences of places, but it improves the way that places impact on people's lives. Now I want to come over to the kind of the main body of what's in our paper. and to look at the what, where, and how of governance. And this is a model that me and Graham have put together really as a kind of starters conversations. And we're assessing 5 different models that we've put forward, and we're doing that on a basis of what's the potential to be anywhere across the country, and what's the level of participation with stakeholders in the local community that they engender. And the first of these is really council area committees. We see those operating in existing unitary authorities, and in a sense, it seems to be that they're the fallback position for governance as part of devolution in England being talked about by the government at the moment. But there are a variety of other models, as I've alluded to, really, and I kind of just want to reflect some of those and how they fit within this framework of where can they be and what's the level of participation that they can facilitate. And not surprisingly, town and parish councils, long-established forms of local governance and the most local level of democratic accountability. What is their role? And not what is their role just in terms of business as usual. How can their role become more proactive, work in a consistent way between areas in facilitating year-round engagement? And I think in doing that, address what, again, seems to be an ambivalence from central government about what is their role and what is their potential. The other model that we captured in our thinking is place-based systems. And so local authorities like Wigan and Test Valley put forward as going that degree further, having a place-based systems focus to understand how services can be responsive and to a degree co-created. And many of the ways of working in that place-based system approach have much in common with place management. Place partnerships not only exist in place management, but I think are one of the key structures, ways of operating, as Nikos emphasized, that we associate with place management. And so what is their role? What is the role of the processes, not just the partnerships, but what is the role of the processes that are built around those? And how do they sit alongside these other models? And then fifthly, community anchor, and their role through what's been talked about as a community covenant, their role where they exist as voluntary community and social enterprises that put down roots in a place are used to, and it's kind of in their DNA, to work very closely with communities to develop solutions and to co-create progress. And it was interesting, Cathy alluded to or mentioned the Pride in Place program prospectus for key target areas, only representing about 2% of the population. But in the 10-year plan and the prospectus that was put forward yesterday, they set out a timetable to move towards community-led, built around this kind of anchor organization as a way of driving the continuity and the sustainability of those programs. So those are the 5 models. And as I say, you can look at those in terms of where they're present in the country, and you look at them to the varying levels of community participation, which isn't fixed, can go either way, but depending on what we're looking to achieve, can move towards at least delivering the rhetoric of government about encouraging community empowerment. But what if those 5 models didn't work just in isolation, but depending on where they exist within the country and how they sit side by side and the way they operate, that we look to link them together and that they worked as one, and that we begin to have conversations with government where we present them as one. so that we may have place-based systems and place partnerships dovetailing together because they share common philosophies, that they can support town councils where community anchors exist, that they can be very active within the place partnerships. And if the government and local authorities want to go to the area committee approach, that also those other models where they exist can feed into that. And that really is where we're at in terms of the paper that me and Graham have put together. We're looking for really exploring a pluralistic approach. So we're not, as we've seen a lot of, banging the drum about one particular model and saying this is the salvation, this will deliver pride in place, this will deliver local devolution. To say, no, there's a number of models out there. Can we look at how they can work together effectively? And what can we, as a much broader sector, not just the IPM, advocate how we can get the different models working together and recognize all their different strengths. Our paper will be available very shortly. As I say, it's kind of too long in the tooth practitioners. It's great that we'll be able to quote Wade and Galpin, 2025. It's an article that's meant to begin to answer the questions and provoke further debate. And it's something that will be available very shortly for a month to anybody, but also permanently as part of the membership benefits for the Institute of Place Management. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and I look forward to referencing Wade and Galpin 2025 in a future piece. Thank you very much, Chris. And now for the time, we'll move on to our final speaker, which is Ioannis Papageorgiou, who is the CEO of the Rhodes Centre for History and Social Research, which is a research centre established in 2013 on the island of Rhodes, Greece. The Rhodes Project specialises in research within humanities and social sciences with a particular interest in digital humanities. Bringing together researchers, data and sources, the Rhodes Project fosters scientific analysis, evaluates and highlights the social impact of their studies, and provides a unique reference point for social research in Rhodes. And Ioannis will talk to us today about the role of Greek universities as devolution actors, with a specific case of the University of the Aegean, and in the UK, the role of universities in devolution in the place that they are at is a big sort of emerging theme. So yeah, I'm sure for the people on the call to be of interest to. So over to Ioannis.
Hello, and thank you very much for the invitation. I think that I'm gonna mentally help you travel in sunny place, the Aegean Sea and the Aegean Islands, although it's not very sunny those days. And I'll be talking about devolution, but on a more macroscopic point of view, on macro region point of view. And actually, as Ian said, about the role of universities in this devolution. So it's really tempting to approach the university as yet another institution to project upon its known perceptions, theories on how institutions are created or changed, so on and so forth. Nevertheless, the complexity of the institution renders such an approach almost a definite failure. One has just to take into consideration that the university is a concept much older than the modern state. If let's assume that the modern state was established with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, the first university, the University of Bologna, already precedes that date by 5 centuries. So, of course, the concept of university has evolved since then in a constant dialectic relationship with the state, the economy, the geography, and other factors. Now, scientific literature on tertiary education identifies 3 missions for the university. The older one concerns the education of people to acquire qualifications that bestows the right to educate other people. I mean, self-understandable. After the Second World War, we have the second mission, which regards the usability of information for the society and the economy. In other words, the commercialization of knowledge. And in the last decades, we are talking about the third mission, which is the regional mission, complicating even more the whole situation. In any case, the question of missions of the university changes significantly when investigating a university, or let's say a state's tertiary education system. So in addition to let's go to the paradigm of Greece. In addition to the Humboldtian tradition, the establishment of universities in Greece reveals an interesting pattern. The first successful attempt for a university in Greece took place in 1837, 7 years after the modern Greek state formation. We had the Othonian University, named after the name of the king of Greece, later on renamed as University of Athens. And it assumed the role of the national university, namely the state-led university dedicated to higher scientific training of personnel to be absorbed by the administrative mechanism and the economy. The expansion of Greece to the north and east during the Balkan Wars saw the establishment of more universities in Thessaloniki and a short-lived one in Smyrna. The mission of those universities were not only the production of educated personnel, but also the ideological entrenchment of the local elites. Now, the change happens after the Second World War, where the tertiary education turns from the ideological entrenchment towards decentralization. So we have new universities that are established only in the periphery. Just imagine that the last university to be established in one of the two metropolises was in 1948. Interestingly, in the case of the University of the Aegean, decentralization or social coherence was not mentioned as the official purpose of the university. The common yet anecdotal reasoning behind the establishment of the University of the Aegean is that it is a counteraction to Ege Üniversitesi, the Turkish university in Izmir, Turkey. So that Aegean University as a title is not a monopoly of Turkey. The University of the Aegean has 6 campuses established in 6 different islands, plus the research unit that is in Athens. Note that there is no direct way to travel from one island to the other, at least from the southern island, which is Rhodes, to the northernmost islands like Limnos, Lesbos, or Chios. The lack of planning back in 1984 steered a certain parliamentary and media discussion over the lack of infrastructure, the disconnection between disciplines and local needs in the islands, and the so-called finally airborne professors. They are teaching staff that until today they travel daily to each island, deliver classes, and at the end of the same day they travel back to Athens or Thessaloniki. The situation has left the academic, and here you see the mapping of the campuses. So this situation has left the academic community of the university as well as the local societies pondering on the actual role of the university vis-a-vis the geography. My impression is that this ambiguity has allowed both communities to settle in the bare minimum of their intentions. On the one hand, regionally, the university is praised as an actor of local financial growth. On the other hand, the academic staff presents only a limited concern on the university's regional mission. The University of the Aegean has already become 41 years old, and the question of policy intentionality is not relevant anymore. On the other hand, talking about the university as a concept is built upon constructive ambiguities over the last 1,000 years. So, for example, Pinheiro, Benworth, and Jones note this list of ambiguities that you see now in the PowerPoint: the ambiguity of intention, of understanding, of history, of structure, of meaning. On top of that, the last decades, we are talking about ambiguities stemming from the regional mission of the universities. So from a Bourdieu point of view, knowledge is intrinsic to symbolic, social, and cultural capital, and by that is organic to economic growth. To that end, knowledge depends on the length and depth of interpersonal exchanges, where for the latter, there, let's say, a natural field of development is the regional scale. Nonetheless, antagonistic perceptions of growth are not atopical. Therefore, despite the narrative of new technology on the leveling of distance and time, so on and so forth, not all regions have become Silicon Valleys. They are trapped in a constant pursuit of regional specialization to prevent disinvestment. And in this context, it's the universities, the regional universities that carry the burden of creating this knowledge capital in order to create impact. So let's turn to the devolution. The question of devolution poses some really pragmatic questions. As an actual power shift, it depends upon localized planning, decision-making, policy implementation by local governments at a level that are not used to in a centralized country as in Greece. So in that framework, the regional universities, or let's say clusters of them, are vested with a very specific expectation to become, let's say, the scaled down national university of the region. This, of course, already stresses the ambiguities by instrumentalizing the universities. Nonetheless, the constructive ambiguity of the last 1,000 years leaves no space for dystopic fears. I mean, the university has survived 1,000 years and it will continue, most likely survive and develop. The question, though, should be laid on a different ground. How well would not the university, but a university, and in that case, the University of the Aegean, perform as a devolution actor in Greece? This scenario needs to consider two dimensions. The first concerns the readiness of the university. As already noted, the University of the Aegean is a standard case of putting the cart in front of the horse. Up until now, the public status of the Greek universities, the political interests vested in them, and in the case of the University of the Aegean, the national interests vested of them, have been straining their function, but at the same time protecting them from the market forces. A regional university in a devolved region would need to assume a much more proactive role, and under that light will need to face actually the market powers, which doesn't fit the, let's say, the University of the Aegean pedigree and practically none of the Greek universities. The second dimension concerns the region itself. The University of the Aegean spans in the macro region of the Aegean Sea that includes two administrative regions, the North Aegean and South Aegean region, divided in 18 regional units, all of them being islands. North Aegean region is marked as a region in transition, while South Aegean is in transition region, but under very special provisions. What I mean by that, the GDP of South Aegean is really high, is way higher than the 70% or 80% of regions in the EU. Nonetheless, this GDP is produced only in 5, let's say, or 6 islands in an overall 79 inhabited islands in South Aegean. So for those reasons, the South Aegean has been marked recently as an in transition region. So there are vast demographic and economic differences. And the question in that case is, what is the region in that case? So considering the regional mission of the University of the Aegean as a devolution actor, an institution that participates in a race with one hand tied behind its back, it is expected to undertake the impossible role of being academically relevant in the international context, and at the same time cater for a region with multiple faces that actually struggles to define itself. Thank you very much. I hope I was within the time limit.
That was excellent. And Ioannis, as you were talking, I'm thinking maybe a future session with the RSA, the role of universities in their place is something that maybe we could do across Europe, bringing together different speakers. So maybe one to pick up. But mindful of the time, I would like to bring the session to a close. I would like to thank all the speakers for giving up the time and being with us today. I would like to thank the Regional Studies Association for continuing this ongoing collaboration with IPM, and the next session will be on February the 9th on Pride in Place. But most of all, I would like to thank everyone who's come along to join the session today, who spent the lunch hour with us. We've recorded all the questions, so we will follow them up and we'll make the recording available. All I would now like to say is, it's wet in Liverpool. It seems to be wet where Ioannis is as well. So wherever you are, I hope your day brightens up a little bit. Best wishes to all.